Hey, it's Alex, and in this episode of Code VR, we're going to go over how to make an object follow the controller in VR. So, per a comment on one of my previous videos, I thought I'd go over how to make a wand instead of like a golf club or like a sword or a gun or something like that. The concept is the same in all of these, but yeah, we would want an object that's essentially attached to the character's hand at all times. In future videos, we'll talk about how to like grab and release things and different things. But for the most part, it's purely attaching a script and removing a script. So what we'll do first is, in this scene I have set up is a very simple scene of just a couple cubes on the side next to some grass. So this is the actual view of it. So when I load up the VR, turn to the right, and there's cubes, right? Nothing too crazy there. There's a controller hanging on a wall. That's why you see that. But basically, yeah, let's go ahead and create the wand object. So first, we'll go to 3D object and go to tree. Now, even though a tree is normally made in like the generator style, the tree is actually really interesting in the sense that it kind of looks like a wand, right? It kind of has that shape that we're looking for. So I'm actually going to scale this down to 0.05 on all axes, and now it's approximately the shape that we would want it, or size that we would want it. Possibly a little bit too big still, but we'll see. I'm also going to go ahead and add a material, just call it wand material. And that I'm going to go in the orange spectrum and go dark orange, which is like a brown, just to apply it so it's not just a boring white wand. So now we have our shape. We don't need to get too crazy or fancy with it. We want that object as our thing. I'm also going to go and rename the actual object to wand, so it's differentiated rather than tree in the object hierarchy. And then from here, it's a matter of adding a script to make sure it follows the controller. So what do I mean by that? Well, so basically, if you followed the previous tutorial, you'll see how this controller follows the X, Y, rotation, Z, everything. And in the actual VR space, you can actually see the thing moving around, right? And so there's our sample wand, and you can get a sense of like how big it might be relative to the controller, which is fine for now. You can obviously adjust the scale as needed. I'm personally going to bring it down to 0.03. I do think 0.05 is a little big. One of the other things you want to make sure you do is add a rigid body to the object and check is kinematic. You can leave is gravity checked if you want. I personally like to uncheck it just in case. But this rigid body allows it to eventually interact with other physics elements in your game. So when you're moving the controller around, like if it's a sword, for example, it can whack into things and actually have the velocity of that transfer properly through physics. Plus, it'll help us when the actual script comes down to actually interpolating the motion properly so the object is smooth. So let's go to add component and then also type wand script to create a script for that. Double click to open up Visual Studio. And then from here, we're going to want a reference to the rigid body as well as a reference to the controller. So I'm going to type rigid body. Just say RB. It doesn't really matter what you call it. And then public transform controller. So from here, this is a reference to the controller that we're going to drag into in the Unity editor. And then this is obviously the reference to the rigid body. So on the start function, we can do get component rigid body. And then in the fixed update function, not update, the reason why once per physics update, the reason why we do fixed update instead of update is because, well, fixed update runs on a time step, like with every single physics pass, it calls this. Update runs, I think, every frame. I don't entirely remember yet. Yeah, per frame. But yeah, basically we want it to move with the physics update because we're actually modifying the rigid body, which is a physics object. So we'll go ahead and make sure we move the position to whatever the controller's position is. And then we'll also want to move rotation to the controller's rotation. But one of the things that I always like to add in is what I call a specific rotation relative to the controller rotation. Let's say we want to angle it by 10 degrees. So let's say, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. When you're holding a, I don't know, like a gun, for example. Probably a bad example, but it's the only thing I thought of. Even though the hand, actually switch this, probably easier. Even though the hand might be at this, maybe you want the gun angle to come out here versus down versus higher up, and there's different angles that the thing can be held at based on the rotation. So maybe someone holds their golf club like this versus someone else holds it like that, and you want to be able to make it so that it still feels right depending on which perspective the person has. And so just having a variable that we're allowed to control, possibly later on at the user level, is always really helpful. So I'm also going to create a float, call it rotate by, and set that to, I don't know, 200 or something. And then one of the cool things that Unity allows us to do is set a range. So I'll show you what this does in a second. But basically allows us to modify anywhere between 0 and 360. The default is 200, and then we'll go ahead and put that down here. So let me go over this one more time. So we're having a reference to the rigid body, a reference to the controller, and a variable that allows us to modify how much the wand is rotated by relative to the controller. When the script starts up, aka when the wand starts up, we want to get a reference to the rigid body, and then every time the physics pass is run through, we want to move the position and the rotation of the rigid body on the wand to match the controller's position and rotation multiplied by a rotation for the actual wand itself. This is XYZ, but we only need to rotate it in one direction rather than like all three directions. Let's go back to the Unity editor. We should be able to see our data appear over here. So now what we want to do is open up the camera rig object, and then on controller right, we want to drag that over here to transform, and then you see rotate by. Actually, that's the slider with the whole range thing, 0 to 360. That's all that does, is allowed us to slide it between those two values, which I think is really interesting. Now let's go ahead and try it out to see what that looks like. Now, one of the things to note is that the model actually is still showing. So the way to do that, to make it not show, is to go in controller right, under model, uncheck the little box. So this stops the model from showing up. You can obviously keep that there or whatever if you don't want it there. But personally, I like to have it initially because it gets to show you what the rotation looks like. So one of the benefits of the rotation is you'll notice the one kind of feels off. So I'm holding it out like this, yet it's down. So we can actually go back into our wand script. Oh, camera's desyncing on me. Go into our rotate script and just rotate this to see what it would feel good. Probably about 100, maybe 90, something like that. So let's change this value from 200 to 90, and then we'll go back into this controller model, turn that off. Now when we go into VR, we'll see the wand is there. Possibly would want to bring it down a bit rather than make it completely at the tip of the controller, but that's still just a positional change, modifying the X, Y, and Z on the transform in this file right here. So for example, instead of just straight position change, maybe you change the position so that it's got a smaller Z or a smaller X or something like that. There's all sorts of ways to handle that. So like I said, if we go back into the Unity editor and then we go into this, you should see that, yeah, as I move the controller around, I rotate it upside down. I can over here, and it tracks the wand perfectly fine. And that's all there is to it. Just making sure you have that script added to every single object you want to track, and it'll automatically rotate as you move the controller. So thanks much. I hope you really appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future videos, put those in the comments. I'll definitely be reading that. And make sure to subscribe because there's going to be lots more like this coming out. Thanks.